Well, I was just listening to a video uh, from last time to remember where we were, and I noticed that my voice can be rather low and at times unintelligible. So I'll do my best to speak in a higher register and more intelligible. It's good to be with you. My name is Pastor Ryan Drevlo. I'm from Our Redeemer Lutheran Church. It's been a while since we've been together because I've been on vacation and with the kids at higher things and here and there and everywhere. But now I'm back. I'm settling back into my work schedule and looking forward to it, to serving God's people and serving all of you. Today we're in Proverbs 12. Chapter 12. So if you want to open up your Bibles, and we're going to start looking at verses 8 through 12. My apologies for being a little late. I actually had turned my computer off when I was gone for vacation. And then when I booted it up, it took a little while for it to get going here. It's just running a little slow. But we are in a section of the Proverbs. It's been a while since we were in the section where we kind of got direct teaching from perhaps David. Solomon maybe recounting the instruction he got from David, and then giving it to us for posterity, or however you want to look at it. Or perhaps it wasn't maybe the words of David, but it was just kind of the capturing of what David told his son, or just the wisdom of Solomon. Either way, we had a section where Solomon was talking to his son, giving him instruction how he ought to be, how he ought to live, and follow the commandments, the things that are important in life. It's kind of ironic because this Sunday we just had Ecclesiastes, the famous reading where Solomon talks about vanity of vanities. Everything is vanity. And what he means by that is that we kind of chase after stuff that's not necessarily all that important. It's kind of worthless. So when he says vanity, he means it's a kind of a worthless pursuit, an earthly pursuit. We have now transitioned into a new section. We have actually a while ago, but just to give a sense of the kind of Proverbs we'll be dealing with today, we've transitioned to a section of the scriptures where they're more of those pithy sayings that we're kind of used to hearing in the scriptures. So they'll follow kind of a logic train, but they don't necessarily all interlock together like a prose section would in, say, Exodus or Deuteronomy, right? They're going to kind of be of a similar mindset, but we'll address each proverb or each verse individually, perhaps refer to how they connect to one another. That'll be the tack of our course today. Sometimes, not always, Hebrew will rhyme, or not necessarily rhyme in the sense that we would understand rhyming, but they might use words that sound similar to, like, kind of make a joke or make a point. At times there is, I can't remember from my seminary days, but I remember sitting at the feet of Professor Seleska and him explaining how many of the Proverbs and Psalms, what they do is, you have your A-B kind of lines, right? As you go verse by verse. And what you'll find is that, well, I want to draw it out so you can kind of visualize it. What you'll find is that the last word in the one up here will be the first word here. And then the last word here will be the first word here, and so on and so forth. The reason being for that is that the writers of the Proverbs wanted to give average people who, number one, probably didn't know how to read, but number two, didn't really have a reason to read, right? They were leaders of their own household. They knew the 10 Commandments. They weren't necessarily to be occupying themselves with, like, literally opening the scrolls and reading the Word of God to their family. They knew what to teach them. It wasn't necessary. But the Proverbs are good sections of teaching. So they wanted people to be able to memorize large swaths of the Proverbs. This is something we've lost in the modern world with our access to technology, whether it be, the old Encyclopedia Britannicas or it is the internet today. We have grown more and more reliant upon caches of outside information, whether they be books or encyclopedias or the internet, as opposed to having the most important information to do our job, prove our points, or to be a leader of the faith in a variety of forms, uh, committed to memory. Now, I don't think the ancient person had a vast store of material memorized of everything, right? So in other words, it wasn't just that they were genuinely smarter than us and had all this information at their fingertips. They probably had more memorized than we do, but they did have the things pertinent to their daily life memorized. And a Christian, or at this time a Hebrew, would have large swaths of the scriptures memorized by heart. I was very pleased to find, this is just a little brag session. When we were at Higher Things and I was serving communion, of course, I didn't have access to a hymnal. But I was very pleased to find that many of the hymns in our hymnal I actually had memorized, even though I didn't know it. You sing things enough, and you'll be surprised at how well you can actually sing them without having to look at the words, which I think is important. You get to a point I deal with it all the time. You get to elderly folks or people who are struggling to see, or to maybe even to concentrate. Maybe it's not necessarily an eye problem, but a brain problem. Either way, having things memorized to be able to recite them, to lean upon them when those abilities fail you, well, that is a wonderful thing. So, in other words, I can't commend more the ability to memorize. We should all practice memorization, not just of the catechism, but of important Bible verses, important Bible stories, and even important hymns. Well, today we're going to start our verses on verse 8. And what I typically do is I read the Hebrew so that if we have anything like we were talking about in terms of the rhyming structure come out, then we can recognize it. So I'll read the Hebrew first, then we'll translate roughly, and then we'll work on the meaning. So we start at verse 8. Zadik, Misara, Nehalas, Ve Veyabo, Rasa, Ta, Ta. Yeah, so that's the word actually is ta. Sorry. So Zadik we've had before, right? We should be able to recognize that Hebrew word, which is righteous. Zadik, the righteous. Misara, and this comes, I think, from the word tzara. Let's see. Yeah, tzara, which is an adversary, or we might think in this context like an adversive situation. I don't know if if this proverb is necessarily pointing at a specific adversary, but just being righteous. You are going to have people who are opposed to you. Christ tells us this, right? Do you think I've come to bring families together? Truthfully, I tell you, I've come to rend families apart, mother from daughter, father from son. He says his word pierces through joint and marrow, right? So being of the word, let's say, following the word, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, and now, um, it the word of God, the gospel, makes us righteous, but it also puts a target on us. Luther talked about that anyone who is baptized has a medallion hung around their neck, which is a target for the devil to attack. And the devil doesn't just work by himself, but he works through means, unfortunately. And the means would be trouble or adversaries, right? So the righteous are delivered from their adversaries, and it comes to the wicked instead. So, yeah, that's what makes me think even more so that this adversative idea, it's not necessarily pointing to physical or human adversaries, but like adversative moments, difficult things, right? So the righteous are delivered from difficult things, from trouble, and it comes to the wicked, rasa, instead, tata. So let's talk about just the meaning for a second. Um, well, let's do the very simplest uh, understanding. How do we how do we translate this or understand it in the light of Jesus Christ? Well, uh, Jesus makes us righteous through his word, through the forgiveness of sins, right? And we are delivered from our sins, trouble, by Christ, right? So we should maybe be clear. What makes someone righteous? I don't think being righteous, even in the Old Testament, because, even David says, uh, there is not one righteous, no, not even one, right? So we have people in the Old Testament understanding that righteousness does not come from, in other words, being righteous or being a righteous person. Righteousness is a gift, it's given by God, coram deo, right? Um, so the righteous are righteous because they cling to God, they cling more clearly to Christ alone, and they are delivered. Now, how are we delivered? Well, we're delivered because our sin is placed on Christ. And we would understand that on the cross, in the great exchange, Christ becomes the worst of us, right? So that trouble that we're delivered from, where does it go? It goes to Christ. It goes into his hands and his feet. It goes to the thorns and to the stripes. It goes to him. Now, maybe what could we think of? Of course, that would be a good way to understand it because it talks about Christ. But let's talk about perhaps an Old Testament understanding, and then maybe let's talk about a modern day understanding. So, Old Testament understanding. How can we understand that righteous people are delivered from trouble and it comes instead to the wicked? Well, I kind of think about um, when bullies, right, wicked people start wars. They are adversative by nature. Typically, in the long run, it works out as such that the righteous or those who are good, in a sense of free from blame, free from, like, in other words, they're not necessarily perfect, but they are not the ones bullying, causing adversity, causing strikes. So I mean, World War II, right? You have adversative people, the Nazis starting things, but the righteous, those who were attacked, they were eventually delivered, and that evil, that wickedness, fell upon the Germans. They were defeated, and the worst of the war crimes folks were executed for their sin, um, for their wickedness. In a modern day, oh, I don't know. I mean, it seems like there's this interesting thing today that I've noticed where on the left or liberal side of the, and when I say left, I mean like the far, far left, not just typical liberals, but like the far, far left, there seems to be this thing where, like, for example, what was the story? It was out in Portland, and two lesbians started a bar, and the bar closed down within a couple of days because apparently what they were doing wasn't far left enough, right? So you have left people who are being literally eaten by other left people. So I wonder, and that's probably not great saying like wickedness. I don't mean to be controversial, but the sense that, like, when you're on the wicked side of the coin, you know, you do things, and maybe you're, well, another maybe example would be, I don't know if you're very familiar with it, but there's a thing on the internet, like on YouTube videos and other various places, where there's things called trolls, these people who just sit out there behind a computer screen, and they're doing their very best to agitate and cause arguments, and eventually they get called out for it and kind of blackballed, and the very same things they were doing to other people happen to them, which is very common in the scriptures. I think it's very common in real life that a lot of times the things that wicked people accuse others of doing ends up happening either to them or they are found to have been doing it themselves, right? So this idea that like um, the wickedness that adversative people are putting out into the world usually kind of boomerangs back on them and lands on their own head. And we've talked about this before, like the whole. I just use an example. I'm sorry if I'm being a dead horse, but it's just such a good example. Like the Justin Smollett thing, he hires two criminals to kind of be part of his nefarious scheme, and then those two criminals turn on him and turn him in, basically. So that's a thing. Like when you're in criminal enterprises, how can you trust anyone? Because the very person you're working with in a criminal enterprise is someone you know who has no problem breaking the law and doing evil things. So what's to the prisoner's dilemma? What's to stop that person from turning on you? Because they're clearly not in it for honor. They're in it for what's best for them. So inevitably, that evil boomerangs itself back on you. Which is just another reason not to be adversative, not to do evil, right? To turn the other cheek, because inevitably that anger and maybe I'm sorry I'm blathering on at this point, but um, maybe this would be a good argument against the idea of vigilantism. I think there are times where we see the crime that's going on in our world or the injustice that's going on in our world, and we perhaps dream or daydream about exacting justice, making justice in the world. We want the world to operate according to clear and concise rules. We want it to make sense. And the problem is that people are sinful, and that's what makes the world gray, right? The world's gray; it's not black and white because people are sinful, and they can't consistently do the right thing. So yeah, vigilantism, going out and kind of meting out justice to other people. Sooner or later, that same level of justice is going to come. It's going to boomerang back on you. Someone's going to come and say, "Well, who gives you the right to go out and uh, hurt, kill, maim, right? For whatever reasons you think that there are, you don't. Um, so, vengeance is mine, thus saith the Lord. I will pour coals upon my enemy's head, and I will turn the other cheek and let God be God. Yeah. Verse 9. That was a lot of a lot of talking about a pretty innocuous verse. My apologies. So, verse 9. Bepeh, Hanep, Yashit, Re'ahu, Uda, Ubadaat, Zedekim, Yahalesu. So you probably recognize Zedekim. That is the what would it would be the shoot. Um, I think the participle form of Zedekiah, like doing righteousness, so we would say the righteous ones, or in English, probably just say the righteous. We can say kind of like the righteous, and it refers to people. Oftentimes, when we would do translation in seminary, though, we would translate it the righteous ones. So just we could show our professor we understand that it's like this adjective is kind of like working almost kind of like a participle, right? We're actually talking about a group of people, not just like the concept of righteousness. Okay, so bepeh, peh is the mouth, right? So bepeh with the mouth, that's our preposition, the beth, the B sound, bepeh with his mouth. It's interesting, mouth is used fairly routinely to talk about God. God is what's the word? Oh shoot, God is. There's a fun big word for it. The point is that oftentimes in the scriptures, human characteristics are attributed to God, like He has a mouth or He has a nose. And I should be saying, we're talking about the Father right now. The anger of God is often referred to. This is one of my favorite things about Hebrew. That's why I'm bringing it up. Uh, One of my favorite things about Hebrew is that when God is angry, it talks about His nostrils flaring, which I think is just great. In Exodus, especially when the golden calf incident is happening, I think it does it like 3 times, where it talks about how angry God is, and instead of saying like the word angry or whatever the case may be, it just talks about God's nostrils are flaring. He's ramping up the swing. so to speak. So, with his mouth, Hanep, the hypocrite, destroys his neighbor. Okay, so let's talk about this word hypocrite. That is an interesting word. It is the word kanef, which is profane or irreligious. Profane, a godless man. To be polluted or profane is kind of like the ancient root here. So now, how do we get to hypocrite? How does this translate? So I do have a translation here. Okay, the Strong's is saying it's hypocritical. Okay, Strong's would be a concordance of Hebrew words, and a concordance would be basically a listing of all the occurrences of one word, that being kanef at this example, throughout the entire scriptures. By the way, one of the most, if you're ever stuck with a Bible study, like let's say you're just studying on your own and you get stuck in a section, you just can't figure out what exactly is going on. There's a wonderful tool in your study Bible. I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but so I can't remember what they actually call it. I gotta look and see what the name of it is. I think they just call it a index of terms, but I want to make sure I get it right here. Oh my goodness. Oh, it's a concordance. Yeah, they call it a concordance. So in the back of my study Bible, I have what they would call a concordance. And you'll find here then, let's pick a word. Well, that's a pretty good word. We'll go with that just because it's close. Okay. So we have this word here called abides. You guys know what abides is. And then what it does is it lists every example of that word in the scriptures. Now, the difficult thing about that is that that's going to be the English translation. So that's everywhere that English word is used. A very helpful tool, if you have one. This is Young's, and then I think I have this is a good one too, the Metzger. Yeah, because Metzger's a pretty authoritative source. So what this does is, this concordance will do let's find a good example so it makes sense. Yeah, here's a good one. So hired, I just opened up the Bible at a random place here, okay? So this is hired, see that? And then I don't know if you can see that there, but now they have hired, they have the Hebrew. What's the Hebrew word for hired, okay? And then they give you every instance of the Hebrew word for hired here, okay? And then you get into the New Testament, what's the Greek word for one who's hired? Well, that's mythios, right? And then it gives all the New Testament examples. Now, it would be better probably if I picked a word with more examples. But the point is that a really helpful tool to understanding would be, I'm going to go and use like a Young's Concordance, and I'm going to find all the instances of this word in the Old Testament, right? And the problem is too that it's sometimes like something as simple as the idea of like like land. I think land has two different words in Hebrew, adamah, which is, I think, kind of more like dirt, and then aretz, which is land, and even goyim can be sometimes used to describe. So the English word land could have actually multiple words behind it, right? So what would be really helpful if you're like stuck, like what is going on here? You might go and first find out through the concordance what word we're talking about that's troubling, right? Like whatever that might be in the New Testament or Old Testament. Then I'm going to read every other instance of that in the scriptures, of that word, maybe even a couple of verses or even a chapter around it each time, right? And by the time I get done with that, I should have, we would call this a word study. by the time I get done with that, I should have a pretty good understanding of that word and what that word means. And then I can go back to the original context of my verse that I'm stuck on. And then with that learning, go back to that verse and be like, okay, I think I know now what this author is getting at with this verse. It's very helpful. So the Strong's is telling us that we've got a hypocritical situation here, that this word, kanef, translates to irreligious, profane, or possibly hypocritical. I want to see how our ESV translates it. Not that ESV is the be all end all, but let's get a sense of what they're saying. Where are we? We're on verse. They're on verse 9. Okay. And then we're on chapter 12. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Oh, shoot. I'm reading from chapter 11. You're probably all confused as heck, aren't you? Okay, chapter 11, excuse me, verse 9. Okay. With his mouth, the godless man would destroy his neighbor, but by knowledge, the righteous are delivered. You know, I think in this context, godless is more vague, but vague, I think, is better because it's more in keeping with what the Hebrew is actually saying. I think this is kind of a translation because the idea that destroys, you know, in a Hebrew concept, what would a neighbor, my apologies, by the way, we're in chapter 11, not 12. That was my mistake, verses 8 through 12. So, the hypocrite. Why use that word? Well, the neighbor in Hebrew culture is not to destroy their other neighbor. The neighbor is supposed to support, like this is eighth commandment, seventh commandment, right? The support your neighbor's bodily needs. Eighth commandment, speak well of him in every situation. 9 and 10, do not covet his things. I mean, it's all over the place. So someone who seeks to destroy his neighbor with his mouth, you can see where they would get with this idea of hypocrite. Like they're doing the exact opposite of what they're supposed to do. Doesn't make much sense, right? So with his mouth, the hypocrite, the godless person, destroys his neighbor, but through knowledge, the righteous will be delivered. And I think what that means simply is, right, I will heap up burning coals on his head. In other words, the truth always comes out. It is always known. So if someone is willing to do the research and actually find out what happened, they'll find out that the righteous person did what was righteous, right? I mean, it's pretty simple. So there's lots of interesting connections here. Like, for example, the first part of the verse, what we say about our neighbor can easily destroy him, right? How we talk about his character, how we talk about his person, it is very easy to destroy our neighbors. That's a simple thing. Sometimes the second part of the verse, we should not believe what we hear from other people, but rather believe what we find in research, and we should talk to the individual ourselves, right? If we want to know the truth, we should go to the source, so to speak, right? And then, you know, the last little thought here is that a righteous person should wait on the Lord. Should wait on the Lord that the good things of this world will be revealed. You're clinging to Christ, and you're doing your best to be a righteous person in the world. Will be revealed either in this life or at the last judgment. It'll be revealed. I think it's something maybe important for us to hold on to, because the faster and faster we move towards persecution, with hate crime legislation coming in, and the conservative Christian saying that certain activities are biblically immoral or are just immoral, not biblical, they're against God's will, right? With that becoming more and more, it's very easy for uh, our kind of cultural forces, our governmental forces, uh, both here and abroad, to destroy a Christian very easily. I mean, hurl all kinds of awful insults. You're a bigot, you're racist, you're hateful, because you just believe in a biblical concept of marriage and a biblical concept of life. Um, so, what's our hope? What is our resolve? What should we do? Well, I don't think we should fight fire with fire, but instead we should wait on the Lord and let people understand, continue to be who we are, cling to Christ, do righteous works, um, continue to serve even if people maybe hate us, and eventually, either in this lifetime or at the last judgment, it will become clear that we serve the Lord with kindness and justice. Verse 10 of chapter 11. Chapter 11, verse 10. My fault again for screwing that up. Betub Zerakim Ta'alos Kira Uba 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 Abod, sorry, Resaim Rina. When let's actually look right at the scriptures here. When it goes well with the righteous, the city rejoices. Yeah. Kira would be city, and Ta'alos rejoices. I think Ta'alos actually comes from Allah. No. Wow, that's crazy. So Ta'alos has one occurrence in the entire scriptures, and it's here. That's interesting. So, yeah. So, okay, so we have when it goes well with the righteous, the city rejoices, and when the wicked perish, there are shouts of gladness, jubilation, renah. Resaim, you should rasa, it would be wickedness or evil. So resaim would be wicked ones, right? So when the wicked ones perish, this, it's so funny. My wife she really opened my eyes to scriptures recently. We were sitting at the dinner table having devotion, and she mentioned to me, we were reading the story of Jericho. That's what the kids picked that night. We've gotten to the point now, we have a large picture Bible that we do for devotions at night. And we've read through it probably 4 or 5 times, teaching the really important biblical stories. So now we let the kids pick. We let them read, we let them pick. They lead devotion, they lead the prayers, all kinds of that stuff. And a couple nights ago, one of the kids picked the Fall of Jericho. And we have questions that come along with the devotion, and we've done the questions many times. So the kids know the answers already. So I said, let's do something different. Let's talk about things tonight about the story that we had never noticed before. Okay, so I brought up a couple things. The kids brought up a couple things. My wife said, do you think the soldiers who went in and had to take care of Jericho had PTSD? I was like, that is such an interesting, thought-provoking question. Because if you remember the story, the walls fall down, and then God commands the people, once the walls come down, the people of Israel run in and set Jericho on fire. That's God's command, to basically not reap in any of the spoils, not take anything from there, but basically burn the place to the ground. And so you've got grown men who go in and light houses and families on fire, even if it was right. And I talked to the kids a lot about that Jericho, we know from the story that the people of Jericho had already heard of the Israelites and their Hebrew God. They knew that God was fighting for them. And they had heard about Egypt and what had happened to Egypt in the Red Sea. Almost everyone in the Middle East had heard about that, because that stuff travels fast. So they're sitting inside the city of Jericho, and they, like literally God, the creator of everything, is fighting for Israel, and they continue to hide behind their walls. I'd like to think, although probably not, if that had been me, I would have walked out of the city and said, if you can't beat them, join them and become, because Israel did have a process to become part of Israel. And, I asked a hypothetical question. If the people of Jericho had come out and said, we want to be part of you, we want to serve your God, would God have allowed that? Was there a way in order to do that? And of course, we know from Exodus, there was a way for a sojourner, which is a foreign person, to become part of Israel, right? So would have God accepted them? Well, God accepts anyone who worships him in truth and purity and acknowledges him to be God. Was there a way to incorporate them into the people of Israel? Yes. So why do the people die? Why do people still die? Why will people die, in the final judgment? It's the question that God asks. Why will you die, O Israel? If you do not, if you, from Ezekiel, if you turn, will I not relent? And then First Timothy, for I wish that no one would die, but all people come to a knowledge of the faith and live eternally. I'm paraphrasing, sorry. So, we can't. I don't. It's not very beneficial to us to sit around and argue as to why does God devote a people to destruction? Because it's not just God working here at this point. He's holding out His majesty, not necessarily His mercy yet, but He's holding out He's very clear God is who He says He is, and He can do great things. But the people of Jericho and the other people of the conquest, they don't bend a knee, turn towards God. They turn away from Him. They hide behind their walls because they think their walls are impregnable, right? In other words, the walls become their idol. They believe, they put their trust in the walls of Jericho, that these walls are going to hold out God. Yeah. Or I mean, we do it today, right? We think our money or our health system or even our government is going to somehow take care of us better than God can. It's not going to happen. So they go in, they burn the city to the ground. And yeah, I think Laura's right. I think even if you're ordered by God and God says this is a righteous thing, I still think you're going to stand there, watch these things, and probably be conflicted about it. It's an interesting thought. She has a very unique way of looking at the scriptures. She sees things like I don't see them, and I enjoy that. So, and when the wicked perish, there is jubilation. I think we have to understand this in the sense that there are enemies of God's will and His reign in the world. And so we have to understand that when the wicked, the people opposed to God's will and to His reign, are done away with, what it means is that God's will and His reign is less constrained, let's say, than it was before. Not that God can be constrained, but you understand, like we're basically removing obstacles to His will and reign. When evil, wicked people are done away with, uh, stumbling blocks get taken away. It's a good thing. It's a laudable thing. It's a happy thing, right? So when the wicked, when the enemies of God perish, there is jubilation. In other words, because God's reign is being done, His kingdom come, His will be done, right? And this is something we pray for every Sunday, and we should be hopeful for. God's will be done. Verse 11 of chapter 11. We're at about 38 minutes. So I think this will be our last verse. It's just a nice time for meditation for us. If we don't cover a lot, it's not the end of the world. But I'll square around what chapter we're on better next time. My apologies. I got mixed up here. So, verse 11, or I should say chapter 11, verse 11 of Proverbs. Beberkat, Yesarim, Tarum, Karet, Ubepi, Resaim, Tahares. So Resaim we just had before in verse 10, the wicked. So we know what that one is. That's the wicked again, right? Oh, shoot. Let's see here. We've got nominative and adjective. I'm trying to figure out the word order here because I want to say, before looking at my ESV and getting the answer, I want to say it is something like the upright are blessed and the city exalts, something like that. Oh, okay. By blessing the upright, the city is exalted. So I should have known that because the city is nominative, so that would make the city the subject of the sentence, right? So the city is exalted because the up. We could say it in English to maybe make a little more sense. The city is exalted because the upright are blessed. And the Hebrew tries to make a point by putting the blessing first because it's the most important part of the sentence, right? And we would ask a question, okay? There are lots of blessings that come, right? We especially in the scriptures, Isaac blessed Jacob over Esau. Jacob blessed his sons, right? What kind of blessing are we talking about? Who's doing the blessing? And since we have no referent to who's doing the blessing, I have to imagine that what's going on here is God is blessing the upright. And he's blessing the upright because they cling to him, right? They have faith in him, so he's blessing them. And because that's happening, the city is exalted, right? It's kind of funny. We as a country are very much trying to deconstruct marriage. But if there's one thing that our cities and states and our federal government should be trying to do to protect is the estate of marriage, because it's beneficial to the government, to the state, to the cities. The one of the most like foundational cores of society to ensure that society kind of that it continues, that it's stable, and even we could say that it's productive, both monetarily and in other ways, is that you want family units to be strong, solid, together, unified, right? Um, so I think with that, maybe that's what's kind of getting here is that when you have righteous people in the city who are blessed by God, that's a good thing for the city, right? The city has a strong foundation. And I would imagine that righteous people who are blessed by God affect a number of different things, right? Like criminal justice, probably, if you have righteous people who maybe are entrepreneurial and wise, so you have a good market, or your city is growing in terms of financially, but in a positive, in a good way, right? So you criminal justice, finances, culturally, right? There's just a number of we ought to be pressing as a city. Sometimes I think, especially with conservatives or Republicans, I have a problem with. I'm more of a. I actually did some time last night in research, and I think if anything, I'm more of a Constitution party than a Republican, right? Because what Republicans always do is they always dial back to, we're not going to talk about any kind of cultural stuff. We're not going to talk about anything that might butt up against religion or anything else. All we're just going to make sure that you've got low taxes and economic opportunity. And while that's good, low taxes and economic opportunity that isn't um, regulated, or I've always said or believed that capitalism works, but only when in NASCAR they have those restrictor plates that basically restrict how fast NASCAR cars can go. The scriptures and the Judeo-Christian ethic amongst all people across all strata, right? Rich people, entrepreneurs, blue class, white collar class folks, everything. The scriptures, the Ten Commandments, the morality of the Judeo-Christian story was a restrictor plate for capitalism. I think this is what Adam Smith is trying to get at in terms of the book of Wealth of Nations, when he talks about the capitalism is the best form of government because it does good things. Well, it only can do good things if it's got a restrictor plate, which is a Judeo-Christian ethic. That's why capitalism is so broken now, because the lion's share of people, the top echelons of the market, of government, of corporations, they have no Christian ethics. And the only ethic that they have that has replaced Christian ethic is, I have shareholders and I need to make them the biggest reward, because then if I give them a big reward, in other words, if my company does better and better and better, I'm going to get bigger and bigger and bigger paychecks. So the only restrictor plate now on capitalism is greed, and it's no restrictor plate at all. It's a self-serving open pit mouth that can never be fed fully. It's just a pit of despair, and so then this is why people do this is why there are Bernie Madoffs in the world. This is why there's a 2008 housing crisis, because it's greed. There's no Judeo-Christian ethic motivating people to do not just what's good for shareholders, but what's good for culture, what's good for my society, what's good for my nation, what's good for the people who live literally next door to me. If I never take those things into account and all I ever care is how can I get the biggest share dividend, you get the problems that we have now. There's no restraining of the greed, and then so Republicans always do this. They go back to this well again and again and again. That we just need to let people make a living. We need to let people. We appeal to their greed, right? We'll just we take off restrictions. We'll give back taxes, and then people will be able to make as much money as they can make in this capital. And I'm not saying that people being able to make money is not a good thing, but we're always appealing to greed. We're never appealing to a Judeo-Christian ethic, like maybe life is more than just having money. Maybe life is not just about being able to feed and take care of my family, but also having the time to spend with them, having time to educate them in the faith as a father. Maybe it's the ability to spend time together, like on vacations or just day to day or whatever the case would be. Like there's more than just money, but that's what we've reduced capitalism to, and unfortunately, it's not good for us. I think this is why we have kind of the cultural societal rot that we have now, because there's no restrictor plate. There's no Judeo-Christian ethic kind of slowing down our natural human impulses, right? So we have by blessing the upright are exalted. I think in the city is how it goes. Yeah, this is it. But by the mouth of the wicked, it is overthrown. So I think the it here would be the city, right? By the mouth of the wicked, and I mean, goodness sakes, we can see this everywhere. You see it in the scriptures in the Old Testament. Continually kings. Maybe they do, like historically. It's interesting. You'll find that certain kings in like Chronicles and Kings, First and Second Kings, they actually did pretty well in terms of monetary, national defense, treaties, so like foreign policy. They did okay in these things, but God's ultimate judgment is they did evil in the eyes of the Lord, because they didn't follow Yahweh. They didn't trust in God. So all that stuff doesn't mean anything. And what inevitably happens is, does the king reign long? Like these evil kings, I think the longest, if I remember correctly, I think the Jeroboam reign was the longest. I think he was an evil king. I think it was like 25 years. But a lot of these evil kings, they last like 2 or 3 years. They get killed or murdered by someone else really soon. Again, it's the same thing I was saying before. When you're a bad person and you surround yourself with bad people, you shouldn't be surprised when bad things happen. You know, So I think that makes sense, right? When wicked people speak, when wicked people work, when people talk, when they create the city, it's not surprising when the city is overthrown or a king is overthrown or whatever the case may be. We're at 49 minutes. I think that's a great place to stop. I don't want to overwhelm you. I probably should start thinking about maybe making these things shorter so people can hang with it for, for the whole time instead of being like, well, I've been here for 30 minutes. I don't know how much more I can take. Um, uh, so we're going to I'm going to redouble my efforts in terms of, I feel a lot of vigor and energy right now, and I've been refreshed by my vacation. So I want to move. I'm going to try my best to be a little more technological in terms of giving you using OBS. I think what I'm going to do though is the problem I run into is that I always do these live streams on the camera instead of doing like using OBS, which is a computer program, because the church streams from a computer in the sanctuary, and there's a key. It's very complex, and so what it means is I can't really use OBS without screwing all that stuff up. So I think what I might do is move some of these Bible studies to my own YouTube channel, to the Pastor Drevo. That way I can use OBS but not screw up the church's channel. What I want to do is give you more, maybe more maps, let you see the Hebrew text yourself as I'm reading it, and various things like that. I'd like to be a little more technologically accurate. I still haven't decided what New Testament book we're going to look at. I do like the format of just trying to be together for about 40, 45 minutes, do a little Old Testament, do a little New Testament, and then, just be in the Word right away at the beginning of the week. It's good. So I like the format. I think I'll stick with that. I haven't decided what New Testament book. If you have any suggestions, you're free to email me, text me on my cell phone, send a message to Steph, or put something on the Facebook post if you'd like, or leave a comment in the YouTube comments what New Testament book you would like to go through, to walk through. But if I don't see any comments, I'll come up with something, and we will start on that next week. The Lord's blessings be upon you. It's good to be with you again, and I hope you have a very wonderful rest of your Monday. God's blessings.